Okay, ma'am. So we are live now. Shruti,
Yeah,
Shruti, are you there?
Yes, I am here. Hello, ma'am. Hello, Koel. Hello, everyone. I'm
Hello, everyone.
Shruti from Team Bharat. We are very happy to have you here. May I, Koel?
Yes, Shruti. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Sorry, I have to switch on my camera. Okay. Good evening, everyone. We are here for a very special lecture organized by CSRF. As you all know, CSRF was launched on the 1st January 2022, and it is a student-driven non-profit dedicated for fostering free public lectures and discussions on various research aspects in cultural studies. We aim to empower students by exposing them to new research areas, literary trends, and the latest theoretical concepts. For poetry and dance to music and food, CSRF offers a vibrant platform to explore critical thinking and creative expression. We also host engaging talks that spark lively discussions and broaden our understanding of diverse cultures and practices. Today, we have with us a very special guest, Ms. Swethal Ramchandran. Swethal ma'am is a teaching research fellow at the Department of Women's Studies at the University of Madras. Her interdisciplinary doctoral research in English women's studies is on subjectivities and genealogy in Indian English female saga narratives. She holds an MPhil in English from the University of Madras and a postgraduate degree from Pondicherry Central University. She has previously served as an assistant professor in English at a private college in Kerala, along with UGC NET and TNSET qualification in English. Her research interests include gender studies, cultural studies, modern critical theory, and Indian English writing. A very long list, I must say. She has published 8 research articles in reputed academic journals and 2 book chapters, as well as various pieces of poetry in magazines and online poetry slams. She has also presented around 20 academic papers at various international and national conferences on Indian English literature, feminism, subaltern studies, female saga fiction, digital humanities, Indian mythology, and cultural studies. Swethal ma'am has delivered invited lectures on women's studies at various colleges and has also organized more than 10 programs as national conferences, symposiums, workshops, and webinars. She has also successfully completed 7 certificate courses in gender studies and English literature. She is actively engaged in online tutoring such as English, Malayalam, and public speaking, and creative writing, proofreading, copy editing, rapporteuring, and translation, transcription, and anchoring. Ma'am, we are very happy to have you here. Please, uh, I mean, good evening once again, and over to you, ma'am.
good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for the warm welcome and special thanks to our mentor, Kalyani ma'am, for this wonderful opportunity. Thank you, ma'am. And also thank you, team CSRF, especially Koel and Shruti for facilitating everything very smoothly. So before I start, let me just share my screen. I'll just need someone to let me know if it's visible.
Sure, ma'am.
Just give me a second. Is it visible now?
Not yet, ma'am.
Yeah, how about now?
Yeah, now it is visible.
Right. Okay. So I have titled my talk as Exploring Intergenerationality Through the Lens of Female Saga Narratives. So here we have two important keywords. One is intergenerationality, and the other one is the genre called as Female Saga Narratives. So in order to understand what is Saga Narratives, we have to situate it in the broader framework of life writing. I hope the slide is visible.
Yes, ma'am.
So life writing, or in layman terms, talking about life or writing about life, I mean, most of us do know that it is basically documenting and recording the life histories of individuals. So when you document and record, it includes, your experiences, achievements, challenges, significant events. So basically a trajectory of your life. And moving to the history of life writing, I'm just going to take you through a quick history across ages. So in the ancient civilizations, for example, in the Egyptian and the Mesopotamian time spans, life writing was basically undertaken as inscriptions of the heroic accounts of rulers. So inscriptions basically on monuments, on clay tablets, and so on. So their heroic deeds and their participation in wars and all of those was inscribed. So that was the the rudimentary or the earliest forms of life writing. Moving from there, when you move into the medieval era, we had the emergence of hagiographies. So hagiographies are basically defined as religiously centered writings on the lives of mendicants and saints. Okay, so that was the genre, which was, it was not formally called as a genre, but we had a lot of writing on religious scriptures and saints per se. That was propagated. Moving to the Renaissance era, there, we started to focus on the biographies of artists, because that was a time when there was a revival of classical Greek and Roman literature. So as part of that, artists, to be very precise, painters and sculptors, because a lot of biographies on all of them started to emerge. And then further, coming down to the Enlightenment era, of course, as the as the title states, Enlightenment was a time where there was a lot of focus on rational and secular thinking, right? So that was a time when all the writings had a lot of logic to it, and very importantly, we started to look at the socio-historical context in which each of these writings were produced. I mean, be it on individuals or be it about historical legacies or places, whatever, but the socio-historical and cultural backdrop was more important. Then, when you further come down to the Romantic era, of course, subjectiveness, right? So that was a time when there was a lot of emphasis on therapeutic life writing. So where the innermost feelings of artists and individuals started to come out in various forms. I mean, diaries, we have had self-reflexive poetry, and things of that kind. Then it was actually in the 20th century that life writing was basically established as a very significant genre, I mean, the whole domain. And within that, we started to have these, subgenres. So, for instance, the autobiography, very, very formally, we started to name them as autobiographies, biographies, memoirs, and all of those. What characterized this stream of modernity was basically novio techniques. So we started to see the stream of consciousness technique being implemented into life writing. We had fragmented narratives, similarly disjointed, style of writing, and all of those. And then further down, when you come down to the postmodernist era, of course, we have had a whole corpus of different forms within life writing emerging. So, for instance, we have had post-colonial writings, autofiction, which is a blend of autobiography and fiction, biofiction, again, a blend of biographies and fiction, graphic and visual memoirs, feminist and LGBTQIA++ writings, marginalized life writings. Similarly, of late, the trend has been digital blogs, vlogs, all through, your anything that is put out on your social media. I mean, which goes back to revealing details about yourself can automatically come down, or it can be categorized as what is called as life writing. Okay, so what goes back to individuals is now put down as life writing, basically. And we have had, I mean, these are only, a very, I just slightly slipped in the introduction, but the list is even more exhaustive, actually. And again, moving ahead, see some of the forms of life writing that I have put forward here. You can see it in the slide. See, why it is important to categorize these forms is because until a point in time, at least until the 17th or the 18th century, there was a tendency to, categorize life writing as synonymous to autobiography. So anything or to do with life writing was, it was limited to being understood as autobiographies. And that is why after this whole spectrum of life writing was, it was branched out. I mean, when it was introduced, we started to clearly categorize them as, see, we have had autobiographies, biographies, confessions, memoirs, testimonials, Bildungsroman, and again, within the Bildungsroman, you have the feminist Bildungsroman, all of those. So quickly, taking you through these forms. So autobiography, as we know, is the first person account of an individual's, life history, and it can take various forms. I mean, from a full length, a very linear fashion of writing, you can also have journal entries, letters, diaries, all of those. And the other aspect is a biography. So when it comes to biography, it is again a detailed account of an individual's life, but written by someone else, I mean a third person, with a very objective perspective. Coming to confession, confession again has its roots in, it goes back to your kind of hagiographies, because it is rooted in religion and spirituality. But what makes it different is there is always an element of self-disclosure, right? So when certain aspects are revealed, there is, what is called as catharsis. It leads to a purgation of emotions, basically. So that is why self-disclosure is what, distinguishes this idea of confession. Then coming to memoir. Memoir, again, you recount specific events and experiences. See, for instance, this is a very common question. People ask, what is the difference between an autobiography or a biography and a memoir? So what happens is, a memoir may not be very extensive. Sometimes, see, I've put in the word specific. So it might be very specific events, or, a specific timeline, or experiences based on a particular theme or something. And many times memoirs are also self-reflexive. So you go back to what happened, or how it happened, why it happened, and there are more, reflective kind of expressions that are added to it. Then coming to testimonial. Testimonial is a subgenre of autobiography, which emerged at when you speak about the third world narratives, testimonials become very important, because they are both personal as well as collective experiences, which is centered around marginalization. So for instance, within your feminist writings, we have had testimonials of Chicano women, or Mestiza women, or Spanish women. So your third world narratives started to bring out certain aspects which were negated, or probably, which were not focused by your mainstream narrative. So that is the major aim of testimonials. Why it came out is to, it had an agenda. So it basically had to bring out certain, deep-rooted experiences which were never part of the mainstream. And then Bildungsroman. So we have all heard about these coming of age narratives, right? So we have novels where, it takes you through the trajectory of the character's development from childhood to adulthood in a very, very linear fashion. So every phase is very extensively described, and what happens. And of course, there are, moments of epiphanies and transitional stages, all of those. Within the Bildungsroman, you also have something called as a feminist Bildungsroman, where it subverts the traditional patterns of Bildungsroman. So not only Bildungsroman, but most of our narratives are always, there is always a tinge of a male perspective to it, right? So for a very long point in time, the male perspective has always dominated, be it literature, media, arts. So in order to subvert that, we found the emergence of genres such as feminist Bildungsroman, where it focuses on self-development for the female protagonist. You have rebellion against gender norms and all traditional patterns of theme. I mean, in terms of theme, in terms of form, in terms of narrative style, all of this, there is a subversion. So again, these are just the general forms that we have, but not to say that these are only the forms we have. I mean, this keeps growing. Okay, this is a domain which always keeps growing. Now, I am coming to this particular genre called as saga. So how am I going to situate saga within this domain of life writing? So saga, again, when you hear the word itself, right? So sagas are basically extensive narratives. Because what happens is in sagas, you have a multitude of characters across decades, generations, and it spans also geographical regions. Okay, so what happens is you can categorize sagas based on geography, based on certain timelines. It can be intergenerational, it can be transgenerational, it can be, pre-independent, in the pre-independent era, then shifting to the post-independent era. So based on time, based on space, based on location, you can, this particular genre is spurned. And what happens here is the individual life stories are explored in a more expansive and comprehensive manner. So what happens is when space, time, or location is, is focused and in a very extensive manner, you have that expansive domain. So what happens is you can look at varied aspects within each generation or, across decades or across, you can have this cross-cultural comparison between locations and all of those. So that is why, in a broader sense, we put it under life writing, but it has a more, precise or a more expansive kind of a name. So talking about the origin of sagas, it actually stems from the Icelandic narratives that we have in Old Norse. Okay, so that is the three subgenres that I have presented here. So we have had the historical sagas, the romance sagas, and then the classic family saga. Okay, so historical sagas again is just like, how I told you in the ancient civilizations, how histories about rulers were charted or inscribed, right, on monuments and all of those. So these are sagas of historical events, rulers, places, legacies, okay? I've also put in some of those examples. I mean, if you look at the titles, you will realize that it is all, in the old Norse. I mean, these are translated versions of the title. So it is in Old Norse, the saga of the Volsungs, the saga of Herod, and all of those. Coming to romance sagas, again, as the title suggests, it's more colorful. Okay, so these narratives have a lot of characters and they go into very specific details. Okay, so there is some kind of fantasy, there is some kind of imagination. Very intriguing narratives about day-to-day lives and relationships. So it's more, sometimes your chivalric kind of narratives can also fall into these romance sagas. See, for instance, the example that I've given, the saga of Charlemagne and the saga of Tristan, all of these, they portray, some of those very specific traits of the protagonists that they deal with. And then coming to the classic family saga. So family saga is basically our focus area here. And it is basically, it charts the progress or decline of a family, or also it can be of families. Okay, so it can be of multiple generations within one family, or it can also be of multiple families across decades. Okay, and here what happens is, see, of course, when you speak about a family, again, it's a very, very extensive kind of a scenario that you have. I mean, the whole backdrop is available where you can have history, you can have folklore, legend, myth, gender relations, conflicts, see, conflicts based on religion, property, familial bonds, or, what is called as interpersonal dynamics. Similarly, conditions of working class, all of those are, dealt with in a very, very extensive manner. So here now further down, I'm going to speak more about family sagas. And what happens here is you will realize that when across generations or across geographical locations, when such stories are charted, there is the timeline that we have is very diachronic, okay? And multi-generational or intergenerational aspects, events, histories, legacies, all of these are weaved in. And very importantly, when all of these are weaved in, there are also a lot of shifts that we are looking at. I'll come to some of those, how to analyze some of those shifts in the upcoming slides. But this is the base that you need to know. Now, so, when I introduced some of those genres of saga, you would have realized that all of those are basically male-oriented. Okay, so the available compendium of literature on sagas is built around men, and very sadly, there is a tendency to universalize them. As I told you, the tinge of patriarchy, which which has been taken forward in literature, media, and arts always. So the same has happened here. So there is a tendency to universalize them. And there is a very well-established tradition that we see. And within the tradition, there are certain patterns. So, if you can look into the slide, some of those patterns, very visible or very common patterns, or in literature, we call them as tropes. So you have these typical father-son relationships. Okay, so sometimes it is a proper mentorship. It is a passing down of legacy, passing down of heirship, power, wealth, and sometimes it can also be a lot of strained relationships between. So, for instance, when you speak about the prodigal son, so what happens to the prodigal son, and how does the father react to it? So sometimes there is rivalry, there are conflicts, but on the whole, you will realize that power, wealth, success, and these established traditions of male genealogy, so that gets captured in a very clear manner. And look at those examples that I've put down. So East of Eden by John Steinbeck, 1952, is a very, a very clear-cut example of a male saga narrative that we have. Similarly, 100 Years of Solitude. Anyone who has read Marquis would, the very first, the opening of the book is, where you have that whole expansive chart of all those characters, and you will find that most of them is, it is basically, around the male members in the family. And then your very typical example of The Godfather by Maria Puzo, which was also, we have had the Godfather trope also coming into cinema and, other forms of art as well. So everywhere there is this particular, tradition that is very well established and carried forward. So, as I said, the protagonists are very heroic in nature. They are larger than life figures who actually battle overwhelming circumstances. Okay, so however overwhelming the circumstances, they emerge victorious in the end. That is the end point. Okay, so this is just like, what you find in your movies. So if the hero is not victorious in the end, then, there is a problem there. Okay, or probably there is a question of, oh, who would accept such a ending, or such a climax, be it a novel or be it your cinema, all of those. And then the male archetypal characters. You have the hero, you have the warrior, you have the mentor, there is a leader, there is a rebel, there is the anti-hero, the wise old man. So just look at, when we even, when I pronounce that, the hero, the warrior, the mentor, leader, so it is almost like, they have, they're there for a larger purpose, or, they are there to, probably save the world, or, it's very, what do you say, very, very heroic, and nothing more or nothing less. Okay. And we also have very strong familial bonds, male familial bonds, which are portrayed probably as the father-son bonds, or also male friendships. But when you come to male friendships, always, it is regarding career, it is regarding adventure, exploration, resilience, sometimes conflicts, loyalty. All of these are glorified. And another important aspect is the development of nationhood, right? So how much or how visible is the participation and contribution of male protagonists to the development of nationhood? So that is also very, very clearly charted in all of these narratives. So that is where I said you have affirmative male protagonists whose subjectivities are very well established. Their identities are very well established. You cannot find protagonists who are not affirmative in male protagonists who are not affirmative. So that pattern of genealogy is validated and it is universalized. So we tend to believe that, okay, that is a kind of pattern that has to be followed in families or has to be carried forward. Now, what happens to the women in these male sagas? So, as expected, women characters are relegated to be secondary in nature. Because now what are the roles provided to them? So you have them as wives, you have them as mothers, sisters, daughters. And what is the primary role? It is to support and nurture the male hero, both emotionally and domestically. You see that? So you are there, yes. But what is your role? You have a very limited role. So supporting, nurturing, and it has to happen for the male protagonists around you. So you need to do that emotionally and domestically. So the sphere that is attributed to you is always the domestic sphere. And of course, this is also very visible in your, you go back to your representation of women in myths or, your age-old classical literature. They represent concepts such as virtue, purity, divine grace, or temptation, all of those. And sometimes, they are also tragic figures. Tragic figures who are stoic in nature and, whose fates are determined by the actions of male characters. So what happens is, there is no agency for them. Okay, so their actions or, their course of life is determined by people around them, of course, male characters around them. And there is nothing that they can do to come out of it. So you see that there is a very, very stark contrast in the aspects of representation. So who is being represented? How is it being represented? And why also? Now, so sometimes it is very rarely that, women can act as agents of change or instigators in plot developments. Say, for instance, when we speak about the Mahabharata, we say that probably, Draupadi was a woman who instigated, the whole war. When you come to Ramayana, you speak about Shurpanaka. We have had this in all your classical forms of writings. But what happens is when they are agents of change or instigators, it is not perceived many a times in a positive fashion. It is always perceived in a negative fashion. So, it was because of that, a war happened, or it was because of that, a whole empire collapsed. So that is perceived in a very negative fashion. And that is also part of this politics of representing them to be secondary or, very, very evilistic in nature. So now, in opposition to all of this, we spoke about male saga narratives, we spoke about women in male sagas. Now, what happens to your female sagas? Okay, so the most important point that you need to understand is female sagas do not have a well-established history or tradition. Okay, so just as how we spoke about male saga narratives, you can find very very little literature or available compendium of literature on this. It is not established. Okay, so please get this clear. It is that it is not established, but it is not that we have not had narratives of that kind. Of course, we have had a lot of narratives. In this slide itself, you can see I have put down some of those, works from different, forms of literature. But other than that, when you also come to Indian English literature, I'll come to that a bit later. It is not that we have not had intergenerational life stories of women or such saga narratives, but there is not much visibility for it. And why there is no visibility is because there is always a stereotypical insignificance attributed to documenting life stories of women. See, what happens is, the life stories of women are spurned within the private sphere. Okay, and in the domestic space, what much do they have to talk about? Or even if they pen down something, or even if they try and speak about something, oh, how far can it go? So that is a kind of thought process that generally people have. So that is why this, and moreover, whatever they chart out, oh, probably, that is some gossips or, some kitchen stories or domestic stories, basically, which has nothing to do, or, there is always a insignificant kind of a perception regarding it. So that is why many of these stories, some of them have very deep insights, actually, but, we haven't established them as a particular genre because of this stereotypical insignificance. So, as part of my PhD research, I have been looking at intergenerational life stories of women where, I'm basically going to speak about at least, stories which talk about three or more generations of women. So, as I've mentioned here, it is the grandmother, mother, granddaughter trio, which is very, very interesting. Okay. So some of those examples are A Woman of Substance by Barbara Taylor, The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, Hannah's Daughters, Homegoing, Pachinko, and look at the time frames. Okay, we have had it in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. In every decade, there is some kind of an intergenerational story coming out. But how far have you heard? If I ask, people among you, if I put out a question to the audience, how many of you have heard about Pachinko and Godfather? Most of you would say, oh yeah, Godfather, yes, we do know that. But Pachinko, very few of them, right? So who have probably read, or unless and until you are rooted in the domain of literature, probably it is difficult to get to know even of such a narrative. So now, what do your female saga narratives basically deal with? So these are some of the major themes. It basically looks at interpersonal dynamics in the familial context. Okay, so even though the available space for us, definitely we are starting from the familial space or, the private sphere. But there again, there are different types of interpersonal dynamics. So it can be between women in the family. It can be between women and their partners. It can be between women and other men of their ancestors, or the generations that come before, or the generations that come after. So each kind of interpersonal relationship has a different nuance to it. So the way that sisters share a bond is very different from how a daughter-in-law shares a bond with her father-in-law, or how a husband shares a dynamic with the wife, or probably how the dynamics between the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law keeps shifting, or probably it may start off in a different manner, and it may also, with the passing of years, it may change as well. Okay, so there are certain nuances to these dynamics itself within I'm speaking about the familial context. You have not even gone outside beyond the private sphere. So even within the private sphere, you can always look at these dynamics. And when you also look at these dynamics, one important aspect that I found was, there is always, when you look at these three stories of three generations of women, we can find complementary relationships between alternate generations of women. So for instance, the grandmother and the granddaughter are heavily bonded. Whereas, between the mother and the daughter, there are always strained relationships. Okay, so between subsequent generations, you can have strained relationships. But many a times, the bonding comes, or there is always a taking forward of the legacy by the granddaughter from the grandmother. Okay, so probably, go back and look into your lives, and in your trajectory, probably you should look back and you may find certain patterns. I'm not saying that this is a pattern everywhere. I mean, we cannot say that you can find the similar pattern everywhere, but in most cases this happens, and that is also a sign of being rooted in a dysfunctional family. Whereas, in functional families, what happens is there is a very peaceful coexistence among generations of women. That is because women are considered to be torch bearers of tradition and genealogy, right? So the grandmother is imparting something to the mother. She precisely takes it forward, in the way that is taught to her. And she also imparts the same to the granddaughter. And we have had, very amicable scenarios also. But there, what happens is it is a functional family, and we believe that, women have to be these torch bearers of tradition and genealogy. Whereas, in dysfunctional family settings, you can always find these disruptions between generations. So sometimes, it is, that is why you say you take forward the genes. It always skips a generation, right? So sometimes you may not get any of the qualities of your mother, but you might go back and get it from your grandmother or your great grandmother, because what happens is, probably patterns or traits skip a generation in a ride. Now, other than that, when we speak about women in the family or women in the private sphere, we also need to realize that the broader socio-historical and cultural context is very, very important, because mapping that gives you a very clear-cut picture of changing status of women in different societies. See, what happens is you look into the lives of women within the private sphere, and there are changes, there are dynamics that keep altering, there are negotiations, there are certain subtle nuances, and then you keep thinking, why? Why does this happen? Okay, and when you go back to analyzing, or when you dig deep into why this has happened, many times the answer lies in the the broader context that is available. So you have the socio-historical context, the cultural context, probably, the changes happening there. It has an impact also on women within the family. So there are examples for it. I'll come to that also. And so in due course, what happens is women's voice, agency, resilience, inner conflicts, complexities, subjectivities, challenges, expectations, ambitions, relationships, progress, downfall, very importantly, physical and mental wellness, loss, grief. All of these are the themes that are dealt with. And none of these would reflect in any of your male sagas. While male sagas run behind power, conflict, wealth, success, all of those, here we are coming to certain aspects which have not been captured in any of, or if it has been captured, it has been captured with the lens of with the tainted lens of patriarchy. Okay, so you don't go deep into the nuances, and that is where it becomes important to establish such a genre called as female saga narratives. So now, moving ahead, I'm just going to introduce some of those important concepts within female sagas for further analysis. I mean, part of this is, it comes within my PhD thesis, but also, we can open out the scope of the study, I mean, for future scholars as well. Okay, so what happens is, I'm going to take you through 4 different aspects. So the first one is, going back, your socio-historical context and social markers. Okay, so The social markers are basically understood as attributes that are shared among individuals and communities. Okay, so when we speak about gender, class, religion, caste, race, cultural customs, level of education, employment, kinship structures, determinants of health, rituals, all of these are socio-cultural markers which are inherent to each generation or certain communities, and very importantly, they are culturally located, right? So the way that you propagate a particular religion in India is very different from other South Asian countries or other European nations. Similarly, even within India, see why we speak about caste is even within India, your diverse cultures practice your kinship structures in different ways. Languages, you have different languages, customs. There is a significant or a very stark difference among your cultural customs. All of those. Okay. So now what happens to these markers? So when you take each of these markers and when you try and analyze the role of it in different generations, you will realize that markers tend to be enablers as well as disablers. Okay, so enablers in the sense that for certain generations, it can actually help them to overcome their struggles, or for certain generations, it can pull them back. I can give a very simple example. So if you look back into your own family, okay, so probably, most of us sitting here are second generation or third generation learners, right? And if you look back into your ancestral line, so many of our grandmothers or great grandmothers, for them, education was something which was not available, right? Access to education was barred for them. But what happened was many of them, at least whatever access that they had, I mean, be it home tutoring or be it some primary level of education or even until your matriculation or something. So whatever they had, when they tried to hold on to it, when they tried to utilize it for their own benefit, they were also actually paving the path or paving the way for other generations to flourish or other generations to have more access or to pull them gradually from the space of no access to more access. Okay, so while for some of our first generation grandmothers or great grandmothers, while education was probably disabler, I mean, they didn't have an access. Whereas when you come to your current generation of children in the family, it is a very high enabler, okay, which prompts them, which leads them to a higher level of employment. You have a lot of exposure, and from that comes your standard of living improves and all of those. Okay, sometimes what happens is in the initial generations they would be enablers, okay, but in the subsequent generation, suddenly that enabler tends to be, there is a regressive tendency and it turns to be a disabler. So it happens in different ways. I'm not going into the details of how it happens, but what these details also tells us is that there is no linear fashion for each of these social markers. Okay, so it can be from being an enabler, later it can be a disabler, or from being a disabler, later it can be an enabler. So anytime these transitions or shifts can happen. And the question that we are asking is, when these shifts happen, what is the reason for these shifts? And that is where, you go back. When you go back to understanding the reason for these shifts, you try and understand the larger picture available there. I mean, the backdrop, you go to the backdrop, you go back to certain aspects. So see, look at the example that I've given there, shifts in socio-cultural customs. I'll tell you a simple example. So in terms of marriage customs, or in terms of pregnancy customs. The customs that we follow nowadays are have been modified or adapted in very different manners. Okay, so it is based on your level of education, it is based on your level of belief, I mean, how much you believe in it, or also, your standard of living, your location of living, all of those. But for the earlier generations, there were certain customs that they had to. I mean, you never had a choice. You had to go through it, be it your marriage. I mean, you never had a choice to, select a partner or say no to a partner or, say no to a child or all of those. But gradually, what happened is when there is more agency for women in terms of marriage, in terms of decisions of marriage, decision of pregnancy or spacing between children or all of those, it happens because there are certain changes in the public sphere also. Because when you move from, very specifically, when you look into the case of India, when you move from the pre-independence scenario to the post-independence scenario, there are certain enabling laws which came forward. So you have had your marriage acts, the Hindu Marriage Act, or all of those marriage acts which were amended from time to time. I mean, there were clauses added to it. Similarly, we have had the Widow Remarriage Act coming in, your prenatal, consumption, PCP and DD Act, which also, it brought in a very different perspective towards, how to perceive childbirth and this preference for a male son and all of those. Okay, so what happens is this larger picture of evolvement of society across generations is very, very visible. And the more you look at it, you will find that the narrative actually progresses from the private to the public sphere. So with the expansion of generations or with the addition of generations, there is a gradual progress. In some cases, there is also a gradual regression. So sometimes, progression is in terms of your laws or, in terms of your standard of living. But many a times regression is in terms of the mindset. Sometimes, you have everything in hand. I mean, today what happens is you have probably, you have a lot of access, or you have everything is available at your fingertips. But if your mindset is regressing, then, that is a important disabler there. Okay. So now, looking at this from the sociological angle, what happens is you can see that there is an interconnectedness of life cycles of women. So see, until now, I was speaking about generation 1, generation 2, generation 3. Now we are looking at it together. Okay, so in one particular narrative, when you put all of these generations together, when you analyze them separately, of course, analysis of it in a separate fashion is needed for the first step. But, beyond that, it has to move beyond that, because if you put it only, as a separate analysis, that's a very redundant way of looking at it. But beyond that, it becomes very interesting when you try and interconnect these life cycles. When you interconnect these life cycles, you will realize why certain, complementary relationships occur between the granddaughter and the grandmother. So probably something that the granddaughter is vouching for would be something that the grandmother had thought of during her age, but she may not have been able to put it in practice. So what happens is when later there is a instance of access for her granddaughter, she supports it. Okay, because it is almost like saying, what I have not been able to achieve, I'm going to achieve it through my subsequent generations. And sometimes, there is a disconnect between generations, because what the grandmother followed is something that the mother does not want to follow. You blindly, chose to adhere to a marriage of lovelessness. But, I don't want to do that. I'm going to put my foot down and say that I don't want this, or, I am leaving a marriage, or, I am going to decide about my body or my agency or my decisions, all of those. Okay, so this interconnectedness is what between life cycles. So what happens is it is not only of certain experiences or certain events, but it is a whole course of women or whole cycle of women which gets interconnected. Okay, and when that happens, there is something called as, see, when you look at this intergenerationality in terms of interconnectedness, you can arrive at certain convergences and divergences. Okay, so women in the family or in the public sphere, gradually when they progress from the family to the public sphere, there are different identities that are formed. You have the personal identity, you have the familial identity, you have the historical identity, sociocultural identity, psychological subjectivity, corporeal, okay, associating to your body, all of these. And what happens? So each of these are unique for each of these women. And when all of this is brought together within the scope of a narrative, you see that, please note that multiple generations exist horizontally as well as vertically, right? So on a horizontal scale, generation 1, generation 2, generation 3. And then on a vertical scale, you also have these generations, but at specific points, they cut across each other. So there is a blend between the mindset of generation 1 and generation 3. Or sometimes, there is a discord between generation 2 and generation 3 because of a particular aspect, an aspect that should not be carried forward. Okay, so then, there is a discord. So this cutting across, I mean, think of what is your mapping that we basically have, right? In school, you would have done, you have the x-axis, you have the y-axis. So on the x-axis, you plot all of the generations in a linear fashion. And then on the y-axis, you put each of these markers, or, you put each of these identities, you will see. And then, when you map them, you will see that there is a, there is a clear cut, they cut across each other at certain points, okay? And those points are what will give you insights on why these shifts happen and what do these shifts imply, okay? So when women have decided to say that at a particular point in history, when women put their foot down to say that, after a divorce, we are going to remarry, or, after the death of a partner, we will remarry, that is because there were certain laws for it, there were certain, enabling individuals for it, attitudes for it, mindsets for it. So that cuts across. In certain generations, it was not available. In certain generations, it is generally, or sorry, it is gradually, introduced. So that cutting across is what will give you a very, very interesting picture of what has been happening to society on the whole. And yeah. And while this also happens, now very specifically coming to your protagonists, what happens is you will realize that most of these protagonists are achieving what is called as self-discovery. Okay, so I think in the 1960s or after the 1950s, the new woman narratives were very, very, I mean, it was the age of new woman protagonists, be it in European literature or Indian English literature. You have had those, typical protagonists there. So here what happens is self-discovery is achieved in a very different way. Okay, so there is always this progression and articulation of self-discovery in a, there is a broader scope to understand it. Okay, so within this whole, diachronic narrative, self-discovery is not something which happens overnight, but it happens across generations, and there is a pattern for it. So that pattern is and that pattern is not linear. As I told you, if you try and draw it, sometimes it goes up, there is a peak point, then, it dips due to certain aspects, and then probably, the historical, the conditions are more favorable, so there is more articulation for it. So that pattern is very interesting. It is not something which happens overnight. And when that self-discovery happens, there is always a confrontation and dialogue with the social environment. That's why I said this mapping between the personal and the social becomes very, very important. Similarly, painful experiences. So, say in the buildings domain, you speak about epiphanic moments, right? So you speak about epiphanic moments in James Joyce's novels. So that is a point where, it's a turning point in your life. So similarly here, probably certain experiences, it can be painful. Sometimes it can also be joyful experiences, which throw light on a very different, aspect or a very different perspective. Okay. And in due course, what aids this is also female friendships. So I told you in male saga narratives, we have male friendships in terms of conflicts, in terms of rivalry, sometimes in terms of wealth, power, all of those. But here, female friendships are even more, it is a very, sometimes, very healthy, sometimes you almost find, they are the sisterhood or the sorority is actually put forward in a very heartfelt or a very warm manner. And that is always highlighted, and you will always find these protagonists will have a foil character. I mean, in literary terms, you call it as a foil character. So you have a character that will actually reflect you, and at every stage of your life, they have a parallel mapping to certain events or certain certain points in your life. And on the whole, when self-discovery is achieved, there is an assertion of female autonomy, right? So you put your foot down and say that autonomy and empowerment is something which comes in again, I repeat, it is not a linear pattern, but in a very in a very crisscross fashion. It can come, it can, and also autonomy is something which may not always stay with you. Sometimes, you achieve it, there is also a dip point in it, and then, after a phase in your life, you come out with it, all of that. So, yeah, I think we just have very little time. So, now, what is all this showing you? Okay, so I spoke about a lot of themes, a lot of points for analysis. Now, why should we study all these through the lens of female saga narratives? Is because there is a construction of a unique female genealogy. Okay, so very in much contrast to your male genealogy that is available, you have certain unique models. So when we speak about genealogy, it is not only biological genealogy, but it can be social, it can be professional, it can be psychological. And as I told you, they are not, they are not established. They are not, very well established or prior established. So what happens is, over a due course of time, it gets constructed in a particular fashion. So that construction is what, we are interested in, or that is what is, that is the crux point of looking at these narratives. I mean, they reveal that, okay? And very importantly, as I told you, there is an assumption that generations move from tradition to modernity. It always moves in a linear fashion. But no, many times, there is a regressiveness. So that assumption is actually shattered here. So it can be, you start from a very modern, there are narratives where, in the initial generations, with the very limited education that women had, it may only be your home tutoring or, your even self-tutoring in some cases. But with that, the kind of a mindset that they have developed and some of those contributions to the family is very, very vital than, a third, a later generation protagonist who is extremely educated, but, when there is a problem there, okay, so when there is a problem in attitude, when there is a problem in mindset, and when there is a lesser contribution, or when there is an issue there, sometimes you feel that what was put forward by the previous generations were even more valuable. Okay, so that those kinds of shifts are emerging. And of course, when shifts happen, we can see, certain patterns. So certain role models. So we can see subversion of motherhood. That is one important pattern that at least I could find. So there is always a glorification of motherhood, in terms of generations. So, and that is, very clearly passed down to all your subsequent generations. But sometimes, women in the mid generations, they put their foot down and say, okay, yes, I give birth, but that doesn't mean that, I have to quit my job, or, I have to quit my aspirations or passions only to take care of the child. So there are different other ways to achieve it. I can probably, leave the child with a caretaker. I can probably leave the child with the grandparents. Maybe they can, step in for a better future for the child. And, at the same time, I can also parallelly carry my aspirations. I can take it forward. Or, there are also women today who say that, oh, but we are not ready for a pregnancy or, for a motherhood, because there are certain we have certain plans in life. Okay, so all of those. So these role models also emerge, and when it emerges, what do you say, in a very separate fashion in one generation, probably we don't understand the essence of it. But, when it happens, when you look at it in an intergenerational manner, you will realize that it's very interesting how that shifts happen and why it happens and what it has to teach and what kind of a path it lays forward for the subsequent generations. And my last point would be that, this is another completely whole discourse. Okay, we speak about time, we speak about memory. So when these generational trajectories are interlocked or interconnected, so you see that when I speak about multiple generations in one time frame, there is the past, the future, the present, all of these existing in that present moment. Similarly, collective memory. So memory becomes a key tool where this interlocking is also, it is portrayed in these narratives, because memory is put forward in terms of diaries, in terms of letters, in terms of photographs. So in all of our families, we have had every time, there is an old photograph that comes up, there is immediately a story by someone of the, preceding generation. So they say that, oh, they go back to that. And then, that story is taken forward at a later stage, when they are not there in that time frame. Probably the mid generation is using that story to pass it down to the current generation. So collective memory also operates in a very interesting fashion when these interlocking of trajectories happens. So time and memory are two important aspects. As I said, there is a very different domain. If I go into it, we don't have ample time for it, but I'm just introducing the idea. So now I think here, by now at least, some of you should have thought, okay, there are a lot of aspects, yes, but are we speaking only about the European context or the, Western literary scenario? Not at all, because we also have many of such intergenerational stories in the Indian English scenario as well as regional literature scenario. So see, I have just given a list here. Starting, you look at the time frames first. So you have it in the, it is, I've put 1994 as a start point, but that is not. We have had it as early as the 1940s or 50s. But you will realize that every decade, we have had, couple of narratives coming out. So 94, 96, 99, 2001, 2, 7, 8, 14, 16. So what happens is, and some of these are purely Indian English, some of these are translated versions. For instance, Bridges by Shivashankari, the translated version came out in 2007, whereas the original version in Tamil came out in the 80s, called as Palangal. Similarly, we have Daughters of God the Father, Sarah Joseph's Alaheyude Penmakkal, right? Fani Amma in 1994 Telugu by M.K. Indra. So all of these are translated versions. So as I said before, it is not that we don't have narratives in the Indian context also. Of course, we do have. And what enriches your Indian context is this aspect of cultural diversity. See, even look at these narratives that I put forward here. So, Stolen Sunshine is a novel on 3 generations of Marwari women. Bridges is about 3 generations of Brahmin women. Again, Choice of the Lemon is about 3 generations of Brahmin women. Then, you have Small Acts of Freedom, where you have 3 generations of women, Sikh women. Okay, so your cultural diversity in terms of location. So we have had, narratives the starting point would probably be a rural village in Tamil Nadu. From there, you move into Madras, the epicenter of, cultural revolution. And then at a later stage, abroad, okay, migratory experiences there. Or, you start from a rural village in, probably Bengal, and then you move into Kolkata. Again, another epicenter. So narratives which start from the rural setting, then you move into the presidencies, and then, of course, you have the metro cities coming in, you have European nations coming in or migratory nations coming in. So what happens, this diversity in terms of location, diversity in terms of communities, diversity in terms of religion, in terms of language, in terms of cultural customs, in terms of religion, all of these. Okay, so attitude. So this and yeah, very importantly, caste. Yeah, what enriches your Indian domain is basically the scope for more and more diversity, and within that, you can dig deeper into each of these nuances. So that is why I have, as part of my research, I have taken up this particular spectrum of Indian English female saga narratives, and some of these texts are also my focus areas. But as I said before, not to say, I mean, this is only a very short list, because if I remember for my PhD, the initial stages I had of all the narratives that I could find, I think it came down, the list was very exhaustive. So I could at least find in few days, I could chance upon around 75 to 80 narratives. So it's not that we have not had it, but the thing is how you perceive it or how you establish it is, there is a visible gap there. And that is what I have been as a researcher rooted in literature and women's studies. That is what I'm undertaking, and I'm also opening up the scope of this for future scholars as well. Yeah, I think I've taken almost an hour. So I would like to end by saying that, the quote from Susan Giger: each woman's life is important indeed. It is precious, and the act of recording and publishing. Recording is one, but publishing is another phase. It is always writing against the wind, right? So any small step towards it has to be acknowledged. And very importantly, when it is your life writing, we go back to women, like in the Indian scenario, like women who have written narratives like Amar Jibban, right? So, and also this your ancestral aspect. So look at what Gemma Benton says. Our ancestors knew that healing comes in cycles and circles. You see that? So cycles and circles are, I told you, the pattern is always evolving. So one generation carries the pain so that the next generation can live and heal. One cannot live without the other. Each is the other's hope, meaning, and strength. So I think this is what all of us are taking forward in our families as well, right? So we gather a lot of strength from, as Elizabeth Berrien says, we gather strength from the generations of women who came before us. And together we hold the suffering of the world, and in due course, we are also laying forward the path for the subsequent generations. So with that, I would like to end my talk. And if time permits, we can also have, I can take up a few questions.
Sure, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am. What an enriching session it was. I was just listening to you, and I came to know about many unknown things, like many unknown narratives also. Thank you so much. So participant, you can talk to ma'am. You can ask any queries if you have directly to our ma'am.
I will also drop my mail ID in the chat box. So if any of you have queries, you can always get back.
That would be really great, ma'am. Please do that.
Yeah, so I have dropped my ID as well. So please feel free to connect anytime. And if you have any queries, you can also drop it in the chat box. Thank you, Shruti, for your comment. So if any of you have any comments or if you want to speak about something that if this takes you back to some of your experiences in your family, or probably you should all go back and look whether this is manifesting, because I'll also say that, see, as part of my research, I'm into the final stages of my research, and over the years what I've seen is these patterns of this progression of genealogy is something which is, I mean, every time now, when I look back into certain patterns in my family, I can see that, oh, yes, there are, certain patterns which evolve in certain manners, and there are reasons for it. So more and more, I go into the narratives, I can find, it reflecting in real life as well. Okay, so there is a question here. Why did you choose this specific topic of research? What inspired you to go for it? As part of my MPhil, I looked at, I was basically dealing with menstrual narratives. So from there, my initial, plan for PhD was to expand it. But then, by the time, when we speak about menstrual narratives, or probably, the nuances pertaining to representation of menstruation, we again go back to certain concepts within families, right? So what are ideas regarding menstruation that you get from your parents or your mothers or grandmothers, and then how you try and subvert them. So that is what, starting from menstruation was only a starting point. So starting from there, we started to think about how these changes, or, when subversive patterns are introduced, you start from the family and then you put it out to the public sphere. So what prompts these changes? So thinking about these changes is what brought me to these, aspect of, saga. So then it was then that I realized that there is this particular genre where sagas have a particular, they speak for it. In terms of transitions. Okay. Do you think that more than men, women advocate patriarchy? Men are there, except but the women run the system too. Of course, yes, because when I spoke about these regressive mindsets, okay, so regressive mindsets is, it is not only, probably because of patriarchy, and also when I spoke about these enabling and disabling factors, social markers, be it education or employment. Very specifically from my research, what I can say is, in some of the generations, I've found that more than women, men have been enabling factors. So many a times when you study about the role of women in history, you always go back to the role played by men in, providing them for a platform. Putting forward paths for them. So sometimes access to education or employment or certain, certain platforms are, the access is through the men. Okay, so what happens is, many a times they become enablers, and women in families also become disablers. So why, a generation does not want to follow what their mothers followed, because they found a problem there. It was probably a redundant kind of an attitude. So I don't want to follow that, or my mother is thrusting it upon me, and I don't want to follow it because it is an attitude that is, it is, she has internalized, or it is a conditioning that she is trying to thrust it upon me. So I don't want to follow that. I want to break and come out. So of course, yes, internalization by women is, that is also something that we can see, and sometimes you also feel that that is even more dangerous, right? We end up saying that women are women's most worst enemies. So sometimes we also find that in families and narratives. Okay, Shruti Mondal is asking about secondary sources or auto fiction. Okay, Shruti, so I will probably look into that and get back to you. Autofiction is not very specifically my area, but I can help you with it. But maybe I just need some time to, probably we can connect personally. What would you suggest aspiring researchers to look for when they are beginning to explore this particular field or genre? Simply speaking, how do we start? Are there introductory texts? No, you will not find introductory texts, which will actually put forward concepts, all of these concepts. Okay, this is this, you apply it onto the text. No, you will not actually find, because as I told you, there are narratives. Of course, there are narratives, but this, see, you even do a normal Google search. Just Google and see female sagas. you will only find some of these, when you go back to sagas again, these extensive sagas on, sometimes, every time you go back, it shows you the Twilight Saga or things of that kind. Okay, but it's not that. You have more serious narratives which explores many of these themes and aspects. But what happens is there are no starting points for it, or there are no established points for it. So as a researcher, what I did was, the more and more I was reading narratives of women, by women, for women. I was trying to look for these patterns, how these patterns are explicated in those narratives. So, and in all of these narratives, it doesn't move in a similar fashion. As I said, some of them, some of the translations, there are modified versions to it, all of those. So the only thing is, the more you read, probably you should narrow down on the patterns. That is what I did, because otherwise, we don't have a established literature per se that will give you all these concepts clearly. How do female saga narratives use the concept of legacy to empower or restrict choices? Yes, that's interesting, because as I said in one of those slides, see, legacy can be used in two ways. You can use it in in a very you can use it in a very empowering manner. So sometimes, you can say, oh, but, women are the torchbearers of tradition and legacy. So you can say it with a lot of pride. Okay, so all of us have done that, right? Oh, but, I carry forward something that my mother taught me, be it a recipe, be it anything, okay, be it attitude or whatever. So you can look at it in that way. Legacy is looked at it in that way, but at the same time, many a times it can also be tweaked. Okay, so to say that, oh, but in order to follow the legacy, you have to stick on to this. Okay, you cannot take a choice, or you cannot exercise your agency because that is against the legacy of the family. So that is why many for many of them in families, when you have to take a path-breaking decision, you would face barriers, because your preceding generations would say, oh, but in the name of legacy, you cannot break the legacy of the family. We have had a very smooth, in terms of marriage, or in terms of, whatever your decisions or employment choices or whatever, we have not had women in the family doing such things. So your legacy is something which will also pull you down. So it happens in both ways. Legacy can be tweaked in order for a woman to follow an orthodox. Follow, probably, it is not a following out of her, complete choice, but she has to fit into the framework in the name of legacy. Okay, so sometimes, when people do it out of, when they do it, when you're willing to do it, it is fine. It is up to you. You're happy with it. That's particularly fine. But, when you do it in a very different manner, or when you're asked to, fit into the framework, even though you don't want to, it becomes a problem, right? So there, your legacy is, it is an aspect that is pulling you down. Okay. There was a question in between. Yeah. Shruti, is there a narrative you would like to suggest that could help me? You are asking about saga narrative, or is that an autofiction? If, yeah.
Ma'am, she is asking about saga narratives.
Saga narrative. Saga narratives, say, all of those texts that I said are narratives. And of course, there are very, I think every time, every year there are a couple of sagas coming out, even though, they are not named. For instance, the latest saga that I read was the Chitra Banerjee Divakarni's latest novel, Independence, right? So that has there is a plot of, it's basically, a saga narrative. Similarly, there is another one called Breaking Free. It's written by Vasanthi, if I remember. Yeah. So you look for intergenerational narratives, and I'm sure where this mother-daughter It can be 2 generations, it can be 3 generations, or it may not necessarily be women within one family. Okay, so for instance, Anita Nair's Ladies Coupe is it's a very familiar novel, right, in the Indian English scenario. So what happens is, in Ladies Coupe, you have women of different generations, but of not one family. They are from random families, but somewhere, there are certain patterns which connect them together. Okay, so yeah, and there are a lot of I think one of those slides also had most of those examples.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Everyone is saying thanks to you. Really, it was nice.
Thank you, Koel, and once again, thank you, Kalyani ma'am. I'm not sure if she's here, but thank you very much for the opportunity, and looking forward to meeting you all somewhere, sometime in another platform. Thank
Sure,
you,
ma'am. And in this platform also.
Oh yes, for sure, for sure.
Yeah. So now it's time to a formal vote of thanks. Please allow me to do that. So, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, this March month marks the International Women's Day. Okay, so in this International Women's Day month, today we have explored a fascinating concept, intergenerationality, through the lens of female saga narratives. Now, by examining these narratives, we can see how women experiences, challenges, and triumphs have been shaped by the generation they came before them. I mean, that came before them. So we can also see how these stories serve as a powerful tool of passing down knowledge, values, and cultural identity from mothers to daughters, grandmothers to granddaughters, as already Shwetal ma'am said. Now, by saying this on behalf of our esteemed organization, Cultural Studies Research Forum, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Ms. Shwetal Ramchandran ma'am, our distinguished resource person. Her enlightening discourse on this topic has left an indelible mark on our minds. Her insight illuminated the intricate connection between past and present, weaving a narrative that transcends time. And through her lens, we all already glimpse the resilience, wisdom, and also such shared experience of women across epoch. Now, next, I really want to thank to Dr. Kalani Valat ma'am, who is the driving force behind our journey. And lastly, a sincere expression of gratitude to all the participants for their invaluable contribution to the success of our event. So thank you, one and all. See you soon with another enriching session on Cultural Studies Research Forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, ma'am. So, ma'am, I am ending this session with your
Sure.
permission.
Thank you, Koel.
Thank you, Shruti.